70% of millennial and Gen Z Americans struggle to afford their housing payments every single month. Roughly 50% don't have enough emergency savings to cover 3 months of expenses. And roughly 49% of young adults aged 18 to 29 are currently living with their parents. Do you think that's an issue? I'd say those are just 3 statistics of many that point towards a dire issue that is currently wrecking the freaking lives of millions of young Americans. Now, this is super interesting right now because a lot of organizations have been reaching out to young voters and asking them what matters to them leading up to these 2025 elections. And you aren't going to be shocked to hear that affordability is up there on everyone's list. Because look, affordability affects every aspect of your life. Where are you going to live? Are you going to have kids? Are you going to be there for your kids? Are you going to invest towards your future? Or can you even afford to get a job that you have to drive to because your 2002 Ford Explorer may give out at any second and you can't pull together another 10 grand for another car with 150K miles on it? This is a serious crisis, and I want to address some of the main concerns that NPR received when they asked young voters what their major concerns were. I'll link the article in the description if you want to read it later, but I want to focus on the 2 major concerns that were addressed in it. We dreamed of building a life that included owning a house, raising a family, and traveling. Now, the idea of simply buying a home feels like the pinnacle of possibility, while starting a family seems unrealistic, and travel feels like that might just be something that is only possible in retirement. That response came from a 37-year-old named Dax in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I know that resonates with a lot of us. It sure as hell resonates with me, because the truth is, the cost of purchasing a home right now is insane. The median age for a first-time home buyer in the U.S., get this, okay? It's not in the 20s. No, it's not 28-year-olds, 29-year-olds. It's not even a 30-year-old. It is 38 years old right now, okay? Yeah, the median age of a first-time home buyer in the U.S. is 38 years old. The average cost of raising a child is between 13 and 23 grand right now. And while some people prioritize, travel at the expense of other things, for most people, travel is just completely off the list of possibilities because A, their job just won't grant them the time off, or they simply cannot afford it. Let me share some incredibly eye-opening numbers with you really quick. Since 2019, U.S. home prices have risen by roughly 60%. That's with a 6. During that same period, average rents have increased by almost 30%. Half of all renter households spend more than 30% of their entire income on housing and utilities. Look, this isn't something that can be fixed by depriving yourself of a tasty Starbucks coffee once a week, okay? Now, lucky for us, wages have increased around 22 to 25% during the same time. But once you take the rough 23% inflation into the equation, your purchasing power has increased by 1 to 1.5%. But that 1.5% completely evaporates when it comes to keeping up with, the increased skyrocketing cost in housing. If you're struggling to pay your rent, your mortgage, or save up for a down payment, you are not alone in that. This is a universal struggle for millennial and Gen Z Americans right now. Because honestly, let's look at it. Inflation has kicked our ass. Landlords hiked the price of rent after the pandemic significantly. And we have an enormous supply shortage of housing in this country relative to demand. So you're struggling to buy a home or you're struggling to pay your rent. You turn on the TV and you see someone talking about how we're not having enough kids. You've all seen people talking about this. Great. Tell me, brother, how are we supposed to have kids when our housing eats 30% of our income and childcare, on average, takes about 22% of a typical parent's income? That right there, just for housing and childcare, is over 50% of a typical parent's income gone like that, okay? Over the last 5 years, the price of childcare has risen by about 29%, outpacing overall inflation. If you want to go back to the 1990s, childcare expenses have more than tripled since then. Now, if you want to just, take some recent years into account, from just 2024 to 2025, nanny costs have increased by about 8%, and daycare costs have increased by about 7%. These are significant price increases for a struggling parent. These rising costs are very clear when you look at the concerns of young Americans. This is the number one thing that's reflected in the concerns of young Americans polled across the entire country. This isn't just in New York. Carolyn from LA said, "I often think about having a baby, but financial constraint is the biggest obstacle standing in my way. Imagine what childcare expenses would be on top of what we already have. Seems almost impossible without strain." We have about 42 million people receiving SNAP food benefits right now from the federal government every single month. Of those 42 million, roughly half of them are children. Do we not think that's a problem? Do we not think that 20 million children, depending on our oversized, untrustworthy federal government to eat every single month, is not a problem? That's a huge problem. A freaking huge problem. Personally, I don't want to have kids if I have to depend on an untrustworthy government to feed them every month. And I know a lot of people that share that same sentiment. Why can no one afford to raise their children here in the United States right now? The cost of everything we need to have a safe, secure family has skyrocketed. I don't want to go on a rant about, the cost of food, and I'm not going to, because you don't need someone like me telling you how expensive those damn burgers you just bought were. You know how expensive food is right now. That's reflected in your grocery bill and your restaurant bills, if you're lucky enough to have the money to go to a restaurant. But things like housing and childcare are so expensive right now and are contributing to incredible hardship on younger Americans that are trying to start a family. How is this affordability crisis not a priority for every politician, especially the politicians talking about how we need to have more kids? Yes, the culture is an issue in having kids and incentivizing people to have kids, but this affordability crisis is right up there, if not a more pressing issue. By the way, I'm not going to get too caught up on this because it's not the point of this video, but the three main reasons for childcare being so expensive are: one, childcare centers are brick and mortar businesses, which means they are having to pay the skyrocketing costs of rent, mortgages, and maintenance, similar to, people trying to purchase homes or just live in an apartment or a house. Two, there is a lack of public investment. And while I usually hate government-funded institutions, I think that childcare should fall in the same area as early education and have some state and local funding. And three, enormous freaking labor costs and shortages. Labor accounts for about 75% of operating expenses for childcare centers because you have to have a lot of people working to look after all the children. We can't just automate childcare to make it more efficient like a lot of other sectors. And childcare workers are on average paid less than retail workers, which makes it very freaking difficult to attract and, more importantly, retain staff. And this has led to an incredibly limited supply of open spots, and that, obviously, supply and demand, that drives up the price of those availabilities. Now, you take these two things that are making it seem financially impossible to start a family anytime in the next decade, housing and childcare, and you combine it with rising costs of things like healthcare and education, and no wonder affordability is a major concern for younger Americans. And their feelings of hopelessness are only exacerbated by major concern number 2 I found in this article. The sad truth is I can't think of a single politician whom I trust. Not one. Thank you, Eric from Victor, New York. You are not alone in that feeling. The truth is, we have incentivized greedy, power-hungry people to move up the ladder in politics to serve themselves instead of serving the people they're meant to represent. Money gets them into office. Money motivates them to pass certain legislation or prevent certain legislation from passing. The same people that work in our government, that are working in our government meant to regulate the enormous corporations, end up working for those lobbying entities of those organizations 5 minutes later. And while everything keeps on getting better for them, everything for the rest of us just gets worse. Worse and worse and worse, year after year after year. And you wonder why nothing's changing? It's because it's not in the interest of these politicians to change things. American politics is full of self-serving people, but it's meant to be full of people dedicated to serving us. And unfortunately, that's just not the case anymore. Any politician who is not focusing on the affordability crisis needs to get out of the way of younger, more passionate leaders. I'm tired of status quo. Trust the process politics. This country is getting harder and harder for ordinary people to survive in. Look, the affordability crisis is causing enormous hardship on younger Americans, and the truth is, the absolute truth is this: politicians don't really care. They don't. I'm sorry to tell you. I'm sure that this is pretty obvious and apparent to you already, but in case you weren't already aware, they don't care. Why would they? That's why Mom Donnie is so popular right now in New York, the guy that's about to get elected tonight as mayor of New York City. This is why he's so popular. Regardless of what you think of his policies, he appears to care about this. Now, look, I hate socialist policies, so obviously he and I do not see eye to eye on that. But he is so popular because he is addressing something that hits home for so many young Americans, and rightfully so, honestly. Now, I believe capitalism, the economic system that has lifted more people out of poverty, is by far the best economic system when you don't have government and corporations working together to suppress wages, to suffocate competitors, and to create monopolies that completely control markets, absolute market capture. But right now, we are dealing with this disgusting corporate cronyism because our government won't do their job and regulate these enormous entities for reasons we've already mentioned. Our government funds things that we should not fund, and then they don't fund things like freaking childcare. Look, for the most part, I hate socialism because I don't trust a big government. The government that would grow larger and larger and larger with an economic system based in socialism here in the United States. You cannot have a non-corrupt socialist government in a country this large. I'm sorry. I don't trust big government the same way I don't trust enormous corporations to do what's best for me. But I understand why young Americans think socialism is their only hope right now. But please hear me out when I say this. Socialism is not our only hope. The American dream is still alive, and we will return to providing that American dream for every American in this country as soon as we fix the issues corrupting our systems. We don't need to move to socialism, but we do need a complete overhaul of our current system to rebuild it the way it was meant to be, in a way that lets small business thrive, that incentivizes business owners and CEOs to increase the wages of their employees instead of just pocketing the cash or paying it to their stockholders, in a way that doesn't require growing our federal government more and more to provide for more and more Americans. The American dream is for small government and powerful citizens. Small government and citizens that are rewarded for hard work. Small government and citizens that don't have to continue watching all the wealth move to the top 1% for another freaking decade. And that is not me advocating for higher taxes on the wealthy and a bigger government because of it. That is me advocating for regulation and incentives on business and investing that spreads the wealth out to all the workers that helped and are continuing to help the top 1% build and innovate in this country. Now, if you want to watch a video where I talk a little bit more in depth about how elites have rigged the system against us, watch the video that popped up on one of these sides. If not, thank you so much for hanging out today. I'm Lou Hawley, and I hope you have a great day.